The village warning. The village of Neander was a place where stories lived longer than the people who told them. Tucked between rolling green hills and ancient baobab trees, the village had existed for generations, held together by customs, tradition, and the whispers of the ancestors. For the elders, tradition was law and a guiding force that had protected Neander from unseen dangers for centuries. For the younger generation, however, these old beliefs often seemed like foolish superstitions, ghost stories meant to keep children from misbehaving. Amma was among those who did not believe. She was a strong-willed woman, bold in speech and quick to challenge things that did not make sense to her. Unlike many of the village women, she was not afraid to question the wisdom of the elders. Her husband, Kojo, was the opposite. Kojo had been raised on the stories of his ancestors and had deep respect for the old ways. He believed that ignoring the warnings of the past could bring great misfortune. And there was one warning, in particular, that the village elders never failed to repeat. Never leave your slippers outside at night. A warning dismissed. It was a warm evening in Neander. The moon hung full over the village, casting a silver glow on the thatched rooftops and red dirt paths. Crickets chirped in the distance, and the air carried the sweet scent of burning firewood. Amma and Kojo sat outside their small hut, watching their 3 children play. The little ones ran barefoot across the yard, their laughter filling the air. Nearby, their small leather slippers lay forgotten near the doorstep. Kojo noticed them first. "Amma," he said, nodding toward the slippers. "Bring them inside before night falls." Amma sighed, rolling her eyes. "Kojo, not this again." Her husband frowned. "You know the rule. Slippers left outside invite spirits." Amma laughed, shaking her head. "Spirits? Do you truly believe a piece of leather can call upon ghosts?" Kojo's face remained serious. "This is not something to joke about, Amma. It is a warning passed down from our elders." "And has anyone ever actually seen these spirits?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Kojo hesitated. "Not in recent years," he admitted. "But strange things have happened before." Amma waved a hand dismissively. "What strange things?" "An old woman's chicken goes missing, and suddenly, it's the work of spirits." Kojo exhaled sharply, frustrated. "Just bring the slippers inside, Amma. It costs nothing to be careful." Amma shook her head, but to avoid an argument, she stood up and gathered 2 pairs of slippers from the ground. But as she reached for the last pair, her younger son's small blue slippers, one of the children called her from inside. "Mama, come quick. The fire is going out." With a sigh, she dropped the slippers and went inside. And in the chaos of the evening, she forgot all about them. Whispers in the night. The night grew deep and silent. The village fires burned low, and one by one, the homes of Neander slipped into darkness. Amma and Kojo lay on their sleeping mat, their children curled beside them. The only sounds were the occasional hoot of an owl and the rustling of leaves in the distance. Then, in the stillness of the night, a whisper. Soft. Barely a sound at all. Amma stirred slightly but did not wake. Then, another whisper. A little louder. A little closer. Amma's eyes fluttered open. For a brief moment, she thought she saw a shadow moving outside the hut, a dark shape passing near the doorway. She held her breath, listening. Nothing. Probably just the wind, she told herself. She turned over and went back to sleep. But outside, the slippers were no longer where she had left them. The vanishing slippers. Morning came, bright and golden, as the first rays of sunlight bathed the village. Roosters crowed, and the smell of fresh porridge drifted through the air. Amma yawned and stretched, stepping outside to begin her morning chores. She turned toward the doorstep and stopped cold. The slippers were gone. Frowning, she looked around. Had one of the children brought them inside? She checked inside the hut, nothing. A strange feeling crept over her. She walked back outside, scanning the yard. And that's when she saw them. Footprints. They trailed from the doorway into the forest beyond the village. Her heart pounded. The footprints were not human. They were long and thin, like a child's, but with clawed toes that dug deep into the dirt. A cold shiver ran down Oma's spine. She took a step back, suddenly feeling washed. A wind blew through the trees, making the leaves whisper. Kojo stepped out of the hut behind her, rubbing his eyes. Oma. What's wrong? She pointed toward the forest, her voice suddenly unsteady. The slippers, she whispered. They are gone. Kojo frowned. Did the children take them? Oma shook her head. No, she said softly. But something else did. Kojo followed her gaze, his eyes landing on the strange footprints leading into the trees. For a moment, he did not move. Then, slowly, he exhaled. I warned you, Oma, he said quietly. Now, we have to find them before it's too late. Oma swallowed, her boldness slipping away. For the first time, she felt fear creep into her heart. And in the shadows of the forest, something washed. Waiting, the sun was high in the sky, casting a golden glow over the village of Nyanda. The morning air was filled with the familiar sounds of everyday life, women pounding maize, children laughing, and goats bleating as they wandered through the dusty paths. But in Oma's heart, a sense of unease lingered. Her children's slippers were gone, and the footprints leading into the forest were unlike anything she had ever seen. She couldn't ignore it. She needed answers. A search for answers. Oma stepped outside, her sharp eyes scanning the village. She approached her nearest neighbor, Eo, who was feeding her chickens near a wooden pen. Eo, Oma called, keeping her voice steady. Did you see anyone outside my hut last night? Eo looked up, wiping her hands on her apron. No, Oma. Why do you ask? Oma hesitated, then glanced at the footprints near the edge of the village. The slippers are missing. Someone took them. Eo frowned, following Oma's gaze. She walked closer, studying the strange marks in the dirt. I've never seen footprints like this before, she murmured, rubbing her arms as if the sight gave her chills. Oma, are you sure it was a person who took them? Oma stiffened. She didn't believe in spirits. But for the first time, doubt crept into her mind. Shaking it off, she moved to the next house, then the next, asking the same question. Did you see anyone take the slippers? Every answer was the same. No one had seen anything. The unease in Oma's heart grew heavier. Kojo's warning. When Oma returned home, she found Kojo sitting under the large mango tree outside their hut, sharpening his hunting knife with slow, deliberate strokes. She sat beside him. No one saw anything, she admitted. Kojo didn't look up. Then you know what that means. Oma sighed, already knowing where this conversation was going. Kojo. It was the spirits. Oma rolled her eyes. Kojo, please. We don't know that. Kojo stopped sharpening his knife and looked directly at her, his expression serious. Oma, this is not the first time something like this has happened in Nyanda, he said. You may not believe in the old stories, but that does not mean they are not real. Oma crossed her arms. Then tell me, who are these spirits? What do they want with a few pairs of slippers? Kojo's face darkened. They don't want the slippers, Oma. He let the words hang in the air before standing and walking inside. Oma sat there, staring at the footprints near the forest. Her husband was wrong. He had to be. But then, why did she feel so unsettled? Grandmother Nia's warning. Later that afternoon, Oma went to fetch water from the village well, her clay pot balanced on her hip. As she walked past the large baobab tree near the village square, she spotted an elderly woman sitting on a low wooden stool, grinding herbs in a stone mortar. Grandmother Nia. Nia was the oldest living person in Nyanda, a woman whose presence alone demanded respect. She had seen generations come and go and was known for her wisdom, her stories, and her deep knowledge of the spirits. Oma hesitated before approaching. Nana Nia, she greeted, bowing slightly in respect. The old woman looked up, her sharp, knowing eyes studying Oma. You are troubled? Oma exhaled, nodding. It's about the slippers. They disappeared last night. But it's not just that. There were footprints. Strange ones. Grandmother Nia's hands froze over the herbs. Oma saw a flicker of recognition in her face. This has happened before, Nia murmured. Oma frowned. What do you mean? The old woman sighed. She set down her mortar and gestured for Oma to sit beside her. Many years ago, Nia began, there was a woman like you. Her name was Adisa. She was young, proud, and did not believe in the warnings of the elders. Oma's fingers tightened around the clay pot. One night, Adisa left her slippers outside. The next morning, they were gone. Just like yours, Nia continued. She dismissed it, believing someone had stolen them. But the next night, something else was taken. Oma leaned forward. What was taken? Nia's eyes darkened. Her child. Oma's blood ran cold. She searched everywhere, but the child was gone. The only thing left behind was a trail of those same strange footprints leading into the forest. Oma swallowed, her throat dry. What happened to her? Nia lowered her voice. No one knows. She followed the footprints into the trees and was never seen again. A heavy silence settled between them. Oma forced a nervous laugh. Nana Nia, you don't expect me to believe that, do you? The old woman's gaze was steady. Believe what you want, child. But do not be foolish. Bring your slippers inside. Oma stood quickly, suddenly desperate to get home. She had laughed at Kojo's fears. She had mocked the warnings of the elders. But now, she felt something else. Fear. A second mistake. That evening, Oma bought new slippers for her children from the village market. She handed them to her little ones, ruffling their hair as they laughed and played. She had convinced herself that Grandmother Nia's story was just that, a story. She was being paranoid. She just needed to be careful, and everything would be fine. That night, she tucked her children into bed, kissed them on their foreheads, and checked twice to make sure the slippers were inside. Then, she went to sleep. The footsteps returned. Somewhere in the middle of the night, Oma woke up. Something had pulled her from sleep, a sound. She held her breath, listening. There it was again. Soft. Faint. Footsteps. Oma sat up, heart pounding. She turned toward the door, straining to hear. The footsteps continued, moving outside the hut. Slow. Deliberate. Like someone walking just past the window. She reached over and shook Kojo's shoulder. Kojo, wake up. Kojo grumbled in his sleep, turning away. The footsteps stopped. Oma's breath hitched. Had she imagined it? After a long, tense moment, she lay back down, forcing herself to believe that it was just the wind. But outside, something waited. And in the deep shadows of the night, something smiled. The morning horror. When the first light of dawn crept over the village, Oma rose quickly, her heart still uneasy. She stepped outside, and froze. The new slippers were gone. All of them. But that wasn't the worst part. This time, the footprints were larger. They were no longer the size of a child. And as Oma knelt to examine them, a chill crawled up her spine. The markings were not human. Not animal. Something else had taken the slippers. And this time, it wasn't leaving empty-handed, the forest of no return. The morning air in Neander felt different. It carried a weight, a hush, as though the land itself was waiting, watching. Oma stood outside her hut, staring at the footprints. They had changed. The marks were larger, deeper, and stranger than before. No human feet had made them, nor did they belong to any animal she had ever seen. They stretched from her doorstep into the dense forest beyond the village, weaving through the dirt like an invitation. Or a warning. Oma's skin prickled with unease. Something was calling to her. She had ignored the first warning. She would not ignore this one. The chief's warning. Oma made her way toward the village square, where a group of elders sat beneath the great baobab tree. Among them was Elder Kwame, the chief of Neander. His hair, though white with age, was thick, and his eyes, deep-set and wise, had seen many seasons of change. Oma hesitated before speaking. Elder Kwame, she began, her voice steady but uncertain. I need to ask you about the footprints. The chief slowly turned his head toward her. A long silence followed. Then, he exhaled and placed his walking stick in front of him. There are things in this world, he said, his voice slow, measured, that are best left undisturbed. Oma frowned. But I need to know. No, child, Kwame cut her off. His eyes, once gentle, now held a sharpness to them. You do not need to know. You need to stay away. Oma's jaw tightened. My children's slippers were taken. Twice. I want to know what's out there. Kwame's gaze darkened. What is out there does not belong to the living, he said. And the living should not go looking for it. Oma's fingers curled into fists. She hated these riddles. She hated the silence, the secrecy, the fear that gripped the elders whenever they spoke of the forest. She wanted answers. And if no one would give them to her, she would find them herself. The choice to follow. Oma told Kojo that afternoon. I'm following the footprints, she said as they sat outside their hut. Kojo froze mid-bite, the half-eaten fruit in his hand slipping onto his lap. What? He asked, his voice low, careful. Oma exhaled. I'm going into the forest. I need to see where they lead. Kojo's expression turned stone-hard. No. Oma raised an eyebrow. No. I won't let you go, he said firmly. You heard what Elder Kwame said. Oma scoffed. I'm not asking for permission, Kojo. I'm telling you what I'm doing. Kojo stood abruptly, knocking over the wooden stool beside him. Then you are being foolish. Oma crossed her arms. And you are being a coward. Kojo's eyes flashed with anger, but underneath, she saw fear. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Kojo sighed, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I cannot stop you, he said. But I will not follow you. Oma nodded once, turned on her heel, and walked away. Alone. Into the trees. The moment she stepped past the village boundary, the air changed. The warmth of the sun vanished, swallowed by the towering trees. The light dimmed, replaced by a thick green gloom. The world fell silent, no wind, no birds, no insects. Only the sound of her own footsteps against the damp earth. Oma hesitated. She had lived near this forest all her life. She had played by its edge as a child, gathering berries and chasing fireflies. But now, it felt different. She pressed forward, following the footprints. They led deeper. Deeper than she had ever gone. The further she walked, the more unnatural the forest became. The trees twisted in strange shapes, their back peeling like rotting flesh. The air smelled of something old, something damp, something forgotten. Then, a clearing. Oma stopped in her tracks. In the middle of the forest, hidden beneath thick vines and crumbling stone, lay a village. The forgotten village. Oma's heart pounded. The huts were old, abandoned, their roofs caved in and their walls covered in moss. The pathways were cracked and overgrown. No one had lived here for a very long time. And yet, she felt washed. Her feet moved on their own, leading her forward. Then, she saw them. At the center of the village, beneath a gnarled tree, lay a pile of slippers. Oma's breath hitched. Some were old, faded, their leather peeling from age. Others looked new. Fresh. Like the ones her children had lost. Her stomach twisted. What is this place? She took a cautious step forward. The air grew colder. Then, a whisper. Oma. Her blood froze. She spun around. No one was there. The trees did not move. The wind did not blow. And yet, something had spoken her name. Her pulse roared in her ears. Something was wrong. Very, very wrong. She took a slow step backward, then another. Then, she turned and ran. The escape. Oma sprinted through the trees, her breath ragged, her heart hammering in her chest. Behind her, the village grew distant, but the whispers followed. They coiled around her ears, seeping into her mind like smoke. Come back. Stay. You left the door open. She ran faster. The trees blurred. The ground shifted beneath her feet. Then, light. She burst from the forest, gasping as she collapsed onto the dusty road outside the village. For a moment, she just lay there, staring at the sky, trying to catch her breath. Then, she turned toward the trees. The forest stood silent, watching. Oma pushed herself up and stumbled back home, her hands shaking. She had gone looking for answers. And now, she wished she hadn't. Because she had left something behind in that village. And worse. Something had followed her back. The cursed ones. The village of Neander was alive with its usual sounds, children playing, women pounding yam, men preparing for the evening's fishing. But Oma heard none of it. She sat outside her hut, staring at the edge of the forest. Her hands were still shaking from the night before. She had seen something in that abandoned village. Felt something watching her. And when the whisper had called her name, it was not the wind, it was something else. Something that had followed her home. She had to know the truth. And there was only one person who could tell her. The truth from Grandmother Nia. Oma found Grandmother Nia sitting beneath the great baobab tree, grinding herbs in a wooden bowl. The old woman did not look surprised to see her. You went into the forest, didn't you? Nia said without looking up. Oma hesitated. How did you know? Nia sighed heavily. Because you are here. And because you look like a woman who has seen a ghost. Oma sat beside her, glancing around. No one else was near. Nana Nia, she whispered, tell me about the cursed ones. Nia's grinding stopped. The old woman slowly wiped her hands and turned to face Oma. Her wrinkled face was grim. You have already stepped into their world, Nia murmured. And now, they will not let you go. Oma felt a cold dread settle in her chest. The legend of the cursed ones. Grandmother Nia spoke in a low, steady voice, as if reciting something ancient and sacred. Many years ago, there was a woman named Adisa. She was strong-willed, like you. She did not believe in the old stories. When the elders warned her not to leave her slippers outside, she laughed at them. But one night, she forgot. In the morning, her slippers were gone. Footprints led into the forest. But, Oma. Nia leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. It was not the slippers the spirits wanted. Oma's breath caught in her throat. What happened? She asked. Nia's eyes darkened. Adisa ignored the warning. She did not bring her slippers inside. She did not listen. And one by one, her family began to disappear. First, her youngest child fell ill. The local healer could not help him. Then, her husband vanished one night, his footprints leading into the trees. Soon after, her other children followed. Until, at last, she was alone. Oma's stomach twisted. What did she do? She went into the forest, Nia said. She followed the footprints. And she never returned. A long, heavy silence stretched between them. Oma's voice was barely a whisper. The slippers, they're just a sign. Nia nodded slowly. When the spirits take the slippers, it is a warning. A test. If the owner does not bring them inside, they come for the people instead. Oma's heart pounded in her chest. She had already gone into the forest. She had stepped into their world. And that meant she had already been marked. The first strike. That night, Oma was restless. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet sounds of the village. Her husband, Kojo, slept beside her, his breathing slow and steady. In the small room next to them, their 3 children slept peacefully. Oma closed her eyes, trying to push away the fear. But then, a sound. A low, ragged cough. Oma's eyes snapped open. She sat up quickly, listening. The cough came again. Weaker this time. Her heart plunged. It was her youngest child, Kwame. Oma threw off her blanket and rushed into the children's room. Kwame lay curled on his mat, his small body shaking, his breath shallow and labored. His skin was damp with sweat, his lips pale. Kwame, Oma whispered, pressing a hand to his forehead. He was burning up. Too hot. Too fast. Panic shot through her. Kojo, she called, shaking her husband awake. Kojo, wake up. Kojo stirred, groggy and confused, until he saw her face. Then, he was up in an instant. What's wrong? It's Kwame, Oma said, her voice trembling. He's sick. Kojo knelt beside their son, feeling his forehead. His brows furrowed deeply. We need the healer. A sickness without a cure. The local healer, Monso, arrived within minutes. He was a tall, thin man, respected throughout Nyanda for his knowledge of medicine. He examined Kwame, his hands gentle as he checked the boy's fever, his pulse. Oma watched anxiously. Finally, Monso sat back. This is not a sickness I have seen before, he said quietly. Oma's stomach clenched. What do you mean? The boy has no infection. No wounds. And yet, he burns with fever. Oma felt her heart race. Monso turned to her. Tell me, Oma, when did this begin? Oma hesitated. She knew exactly when it began. It began the night after she entered the forest. The night after she was marked. Oma's hands shook. Monso saw the fear in her eyes. Oma, what have you done? Oma could not answer. But deep inside, she already knew. The spirits had come for her child. And if she did nothing, he would be next. A mother's final choice. Oma stood outside her hut, staring at the forest. She could hear the voices of the villagers behind her, her husband arguing with Monso, their neighbors whispering about Kwame's sudden illness. She ignored them all. There was only one choice left. She had to go back. Back to the forest. Back to the abandoned village. Back to the cursed ones. She turned toward the trees, her breath steady, her fist clenched. "I'm coming," she whispered. Then, without another word, she stepped into the darkness. And the forest swallowed her whole. The spirits bargain. The journey back into darkness. The forest loomed before Oma, its towering trees stretching into the night like watchful sentinels. Her heart pounded, but she did not hesitate. She had no choice. Her youngest son lay dying, his small body burning with an unnatural fever. The village healer had no cure, and Grandmother Nia's story haunted her mind. The spirits do not take sleepers, they take people. Amma had stepped into their world. Now, she had to go back. To bargain. To bring her son back from the brink. She took a slow breath and stepped into the trees. The forest swallowed her whole. The path of the spirits. The moment she entered, the air changed. The temperature dropped sharply, her breath forming white clouds in the cold. The sounds of the village faded, replaced by a deep, unnatural silence. Alma's footsteps crunched against the damp earth as she followed the footprints, the same strange, clawed prints that had led her here before. But now, they glowed faintly blue. Like fireflies trapped beneath the ground. They paused softly, leading her deeper into the unknown. She followed. The shrine of the forgotten. The footprints led her back to the abandoned village. The huts remained as she had left them, broken, overgrown with vines, lost to time. But at the center of the village, something was different. There was a shrine. A large, ancient stone structure stood where the pile of sleepers had been. Carved with strange symbols, it seemed to breathe with a life of its own. And the sleepers. They were arranged neatly in front of it. Pairs of old, tattered sandals. New, colorful slippers. Some barely held together by threads. All facing the shrine. As if waiting. A shiver ran down Omar's spine. Then, a voice. "Return what was taken, and you may leave." Omar's blood ran cold. She spun around, searching for the source of the voice. No one was there. The village remained silent, empty, waiting. The voice came again, low and ancient. "Return what was taken, and you may leave." Omar's hands clenched. "I don't understand," she whispered. The air stirred. Then a single pair of slippers lifted from the shrine. Omar's breath caught in her throat. They were her sons. The ones that had gone missing first. She reached out, trembling. But before she could touch them, the blue light of the footprints grew brighter. They moved. Deeper into the trees. Leading her somewhere new. The slippers floated after them. Amma felt her legs move before her mind could protest. She followed. The cave of the lost. The glowing footprints led her through twisting paths, past gnarled roots and trees that whispered in a language she did not understand. Then, at last, she reached the cave. It yawned before her, a black mouth in the earth, its entrance hidden beneath the roots of an enormous tree. The slippers floated inside. Amma hesitated. But then, she saw them. Shadowy figures, moving within the darkness. Not fully formed. Not entirely human. And on their feet. They wore the stolen slippers. The bargain. A chill crept over Amma's skin. She stepped forward, her hands shaking. The figures stilled. Then, they spoke. "You have entered our world. You have taken from us. Now, a debt must be paid." Amma's mouth went dry. "I didn't take anything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. A deep, echoing laughter filled the cave. The shadows shifted, moving toward her. "You have crossed the line. Now, we must take something in return." The air grew thick, heavy, suffocating. Oma struggled to breathe. The spirits whispered around her, their voices seeping into her bones. A life for a life. Oma's heart slammed against her ribs. What? She gasped. The shadows circled her. A sacrifice. Oma stumbled backward. Her son's face flashed in her mind. His fevered skin. His shallow breaths. They were asking for a trade. Oma shook her head violently. No, she whispered. I won't do it. A long, low sigh rippled through the cave. Then, the ground beneath her shook. The shadows moved faster now, their whispers turning to hissing voices. Then you will not leave. The escape. Oma turned and ran. She stumbled over roots, pushing through the darkness as the spirits screamed behind her. The cave walls shuddered, the air thick with something ancient and angry. She ran blindly, the blue footprints blurring beneath her feet. Then, a light. She burst from the cave, gasping. The air rushed back into her lungs. But she did not stop. The whispers chased her. She ran through the forest, past the abandoned village, past the shrine, past the trees that seemed to close in around her. Her legs burned. Her chest ached. But she did not stop. Not until the village came into view. She collapsed onto the dirt, panting. The whispers faded. The forest remained still. She had escaped. But as she lay there, gasping for breath, she knew the spirits were not finished with her yet. They had made a bargain. And Oma had refused. She had won tonight. But at what cost? The final choice. The weight of the curse. Oma sat outside her hut, the cool night air pressing against her skin. The village of Nyanda was quiet, but she felt no peace. She had returned from the forest of no return, but the spirits were not done with her. Her younger son, Kwame, still lay sick, his body burning with fever, his breathing shallow. The healer, Mansa, had given up. Kojo, her husband, had stopped speaking. The village whispered that Oma had brought this upon herself, that she had angered the spirits by going where no living person should go. And deep down, Oma feared they were right. She had refused the spirits' bargain. She had fled. But they would not stop until they had taken what they were owed. Unless she stopped them first. There had to be a way. And then, she remembered. A story. A ritual. Something Grandmother Nia had once whispered to her when she was a child. A way to undo what was done. A way to break the curse. Oma's hands tightened into fists. She would not let them take her son. The ritual of return. She ran to Grandmother Nia's hut, panting, desperate. The old woman was waiting for her, as if she had known Oma would come. You remember, Nia said simply. Oma nodded. Tell me how to do it. Nia sighed and reached for a small clay bowl. She filled it with red earth, adding a handful of ash from the village fire. Then, she took out a small black stone. This ritual has not been done in many years, she murmured. It is dangerous, Oma. I don't care, Oma whispered. I have no other choice. Nia studied her carefully, then nodded. Then listen. She placed the bowl in Oma's hands. You must go back to the shrine, she said. And you must return what was taken. Oma's breath hitched. The slippers, she murmured. Nia nodded. Place them at the shrine, and mark the ground with this ash. Then speak these words. She whispered an ancient chant, her voice barely more than a breath on the wind. Oma memorized it. Then, without another word, she turned and ran. Back to the forest. Back to the cursed ones. The final stand. The trees stretched tall and silent, as though they knew she had returned. The path was waiting. The blue footprints glowed once more, leading her forward. Amma followed, heart pounding, holding the bow tightly in her hands. She reached the abandoned village. The shrine stood before her, unchanged. And at its base, the sleepers were waiting. Her breath trembled as she stepped forward. She knelt, carefully placing the sleepers in the exact position she had found them. Then, she reached into the bow, taking a handful of ash. Slowly, she drew a circle around the shrine, just as Nia had told her. The air shifted. A low, angry whisper stirred the trees. Amma closed her eyes and began to chant. The spirit's wrath. The moment the words left her lips, the ground trembled. A howl of rage split the night. The air grew heavy, suffocating. Shadows burst from the shrine, twisting and writhing, their voices screeching in a language Amma did not understand. You dare defy us? You belong to us. A debt must be paid. Amma's body shook, but she did not stop. She kept chanting, her voice rising over the storm of spirits. The ash began to glow. The shrine cracked. The spirit screamed. Amma pressed her forehead to the ground and spoke the final words. Take back what was given. Release what was claimed. A burst of light exploded from the shrine. Amma's vision went white. The awakening. When she opened her eyes, she was lying on the ground outside the forest. The sun was rising. The forest was still. And before her, neatly placed, the sleepers. Amma gasped, scrambling to her feet. She had done it. She had broken the curse. But there was no time to waste. She ran. The miracle. Amma burst into the hut, panting, breathless. Kojo jolted awake. Amma. She didn't answer. She rushed to Kwami's side. Her son lay still, his small body weak and cold. Amma's heart shattered. No, she whispered. No, no, no. She pressed her hands to his cheeks. He wasn't breathing. Tears spilled down her face. Please, she begged. Please, come back. A long silence. Then, a small cough. Amma's eyes widened. Kwami's eyelids fluttered open. He looked up at her, confused. Mama. A sob tore from Amma's throat. She gathered him into her arms, rocking him, weeping. He was warm. He was alive. Kojo knelt beside them, pressing his forehead to Amma's. And outside, the village rejoiced. A lesson never forgotten. That evening, as the village gathered to celebrate, Amma stood alone at the edge of her home, staring at the sleepers. Her hands trembled as she picked them up, carefully placing them inside. Never again. Never again would she leave them outside. And neither would anyone else. From that night forward, the village of Nyanda never forgot the warning. And no one ever left their sleepers outside at night. Because some stories are not just stories. Some stories are warnings. And some warnings come too late. The end.